It was 1995 when 15-year-old Elyse Pahler was lured from her home in Arroyo Grande, California. Unbeknownst to Elyse, 3 teenage boys believed they had made a pact with Satan. Welcome to this episode of Human Wreckage True Crime Podcast. We are going to cover 2 different cases. The first case was the brutal slaying of 15-year-old Elyse Pahler. This case is horrific and heartbreaking. Let's get into it. On the 22nd of July, 1995, 15-year-old Elyse Pahler was reported missing from her home in Arroyo Grande, California. Elyse was a freshman at Arroyo Grande High School when she vanished without a trace. The case would go cold for 8 months, but in 1996, somebody came forward with a confession. 17-year-old Royce Casey contacted police and led them to Elyse's body. Her partially mummified remains were splayed out in a south eucalyptus grove located around a quarter of a mile from her home. Elyse had been strangled and stabbed to death. She had been stabbed a total of 12 times, but none of the stab wounds were fatal. She died by slowly bleeding to death. In addition to Casey, 2 other teenagers, 16-year-old Jacob DeLashmutt and 15-year-old Joseph Fiorella, were arrested and charged with murder, gang involvement, rape, torture, and conspiracy. Following the arrests, prosecutors would reveal that the 3 teenagers had formed a musical group to glorify Satan and earn a ticket to hell. They were accused of killing Elyse to commit the ultimate sin against God by sacrificing a virgin. They believed that in killing Elyse, the success of their band, named Hatred, would improve. The murder plot had been concocted by Fiorella and DeLashmutt, according to Casey. They picked Elyse in particular for their victim because she was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, reputed virgin. They thought that these specific characteristics would make her murder the ultimate sin against God. Over the course of the weeks leading up to Elyse's disappearance, DeLashmutt, Fiorella, and Casey had stalked Elyse. On the night of her murder, they lured Elyse out to the eucalyptus grove on the Nipomo Mesa under the promise of giving her drugs. Here, the foursome smoked some marijuana before DeLashmutt put a belt around Elyse's neck. She was raped and tortured by the trio. DeLashmutt strangled Elyse with the belt while Fiorella stabbed her in the neck with a hunting knife they had brought along. Afterwards, DeLashmutt and Casey took turns stabbing her. As Elyse was being murdered, she begged for help. She called out to her mother and to Jesus. Her pleas fell on empty ears. As she lay bleeding to death, the trio beat and kicked her. Casey admitted to police that Elyse was on the ground praying to God and calling for her mom. Police believed that they then raped the corpse of Elyse. They determined this by the disposition of her body. Fiorella's mother had told police that he had told her DeLashmutt and Casey had committed necrophilia, while one of DeLashmutt's friends told police that he had boasted of returning to Elyse's body to have sex with it. In the aftermath of the murder, Elyse's family would file a lawsuit against the band, Slayer, alleging that their lyrics had incited the teenagers to murder Elyse. They were seeking monetary damages as well as a halt to the practice of marketing violent music towards juveniles. Ultimately, the lawsuit would be thrown out. Slayer lyrics are repulsive and profane, but they do not direct or instruct listeners to commit the acts that resulted in the vicious torture murder of Elyse Pahler, wrote Judge Burke. Fiorella would reach a plea agreement in which he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. At the sentencing phase, Elyse's father, David Pahler, said, "Joseph, it's a parent's worst fear and lifetime pain to outlive their child. It's even worse knowing she was murdered, tortured, and raped as a virgin, sacrificed on the altar of Satan so that you can earn a ticket to hell." Casey pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 21 years. DeLashmutt also pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. In 2021, Casey had a shot at parole. Some members of Elyse's family, including her father, said that they did not oppose the release. Casey was said to express sincere remorse over the murder and had been the one to confess and lead police to her body. In prison, he had a 20-year record of model behavior and had participated in a number of rehabilitation programs, earned his JED, and was working towards a bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology. During his parole hearing, he described Elyse as a truly wonderful person. He said that while behind bars, he had learned self-acceptance, and that when he was a teenager, he had a desire to portray an image of being violent. He stated that when he thinks of Elyse, he thinks how immense the suffering is that I caused, that Elyse doesn't have her life anymore because of me. He added, she had to feel so much pain while I was murdering her. Casey would be granted parole by the California Parole Board. However, San Luis Obispo County District Attorney Dan Dow wrote a letter to the governor opposing the release. In the letter, he wrote that Casey has never adequately explained why he participated in such a sadistic and heinous crime. Ultimately, Governor Gavin Newsom would deny the grant of parole, reversing the parole board decision. All three men remain incarcerated. It has been reported that the murder of Elyse Pahler inspired the 2009 movie Jennifer's Body. Our next case is about Michele Kalina. She committed horrible acts. Let's get into it. In July of 2010, a young woman opened her mother's closet and came across a gruesome discovery, the remains of 5 babies. It was July of 2010 when police in Reading, Georgia, received an extremely disturbing phone call from a young woman. She said that she had found what she believed were human remains in her mother's closet. Police arrived at the home and said they did not believe that the remains were human and said she was free to throw them out, which she did. The following day, however, the young woman called back to say she had found additional items. Police came back to the home, and this time they determined that the remains were indeed human. The remains had been found concealed in coolers. One set was also found filled with cured cement. The woman's mother, Michele Kalina, was arrested and charged with abuse of a corpse. Investigators now had the task of trying to determine what had taken place. They would discover that Kalina had hid 6 pregnancies from her husband and longtime boyfriend. Kalina had been having an extramarital affair and had killed at least 4 of her newborn babies. DNA testing would show that the remains had come from 5 separate bodies, 4 of whom had been born alive. The boyfriend was the father of 3 of the victims, possibly 4, and tests on the 5th had come back inconclusive. It would be determined that the babies were killed with asphyxia, poisoning, or neglect. With the new grim discovery, Kalina's charges were elevated and she was charged with homicide. Kalina and her husband, Jeffrey, had a 19-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son with cerebral palsy who died back in 2000. Kalina had also given birth in 2003 to a daughter who was the product of Kalina and the man she had been having a long-standing affair with. She had given this baby up for adoption. According to Jeffrey, he had suspected at least once that his wife could have been pregnant. The boyfriend, who was never identified, claimed he had no idea that Kalina had ever been pregnant, although he added that at one point he had noticed her abdomen was growing. Kalina had claimed that she had cysts on her fallopian tubes that she needed to have drained at hospital. These alleged cysts returned several times throughout their relationship, he said. The affair had been conducted between the years of 1996 and 2010, and investigators believed that the murders had been carried out simply so that Kalina could hide the affair from her husband. I think she was hiding them because they were from the boyfriend, said Assistant District Attorney M. Teresa Johnson. After Kalina's arrest, she said that she had forbidden her disabled husband and daughter from going near the closet. When the family moved to a high-rise apartment, Kalina brought the remains with her. She had been able to conceal the pregnancies not only from Jeffrey and her boyfriend, but to her co-workers as well. She had held the same job for 15 years, looking after elderly patients. While she earned praise at her place of employment, she said to investigators that she had been an alcoholic for years and often suffered from blackouts. The case was perplexing not only to the community, but even experts. Typically, when women kill newborns, they are usually young, first-time mothers who are afraid to reveal their pregnancies. According to Jeffrey R. McKee, a forensic psychologist at the University of South Carolina, more often, the death is designed to avoid being detected as pregnant. In December, Kalina appeared in court where she pleaded not guilty. Early the next year, however, it was reported in the media that Kalina had negotiated a plea. As details of the plea were being arranged, it was postponed when Kaline's public defender raised mental health issues. The judge ordered that Kalina undergo independent psychiatric testing to determine whether she was competent. It would be determined that Kalina was mentally competent, and in August of 2011, she pleaded guilty to murder and 5 counts, each of abuse of a corpse and concealing a child's death. During the hearing, it was disclosed that Kalina had secretly given birth to the 5 babies in her bathtub. She had told a psychiatrist that she wrapped each baby up and then stored it in a tub or container, which she then put in the locked closet. According to Dr. Jerome Gottlieb, Kalina told him she thought that 4 of the babies were essentially stillborn and denied that she had done anything malicious. After several conversations with Dr. Gottlieb, Kalina acknowledged that the 3rd baby may have moved. He stated, "She said she might have wrapped the baby too tightly with a towel so that the baby couldn't breathe. This baby was found encased in cement." He went on to describe Kalina as an alcoholic who was drunk during the births and could not recall exactly what had taken place. He additionally said that she suffered from severe depression and other mental health issues. Kalina's defense lawyer had sought leniency on grounds that Kalina learned to deny reality as a victim of childhood sexual abuse. Dr. Gottlieb suggested that Kalina had put memories of the babies in a psychological closet. The judge, however, did not agree with the defense. She said that Kalina had put the 5 babies in tubs and containers like garbage and lamented the fact that she did this 5 times. Not once did she seek out help. Kalina would testify during the sentencing phase. She broke down into tears as she recollected how she had nightmares about the 5 babies, telling the judge, "I cry for the babies and nothing I can do can bring them back. I am very upset and ashamed about what happened." She would state that her boyfriend had refused her request to wear condoms throughout their affair. While he had been asked to testify during the sentencing phase, he refused. Jeffrey would also testify, telling the judge that he would have helped raise the babies despite the fact they were not his. "Sure, of course. Day 1, moment 1, he said. He said that he and Kalina had not been intimate for the past 18 years, and he had not seen her naked. She was always slim, he said. He said that once in 2003, he suspected she could have been pregnant, but when he spoke with their daughter, she rejected the idea." Michele Kalina would ultimately be sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. Thanks for joining me again. It's hard to comprehend how people can commit such horrible crimes. It never feels like justice is fully served. Definitely heartbreaking, and our prayers go out to the families. If you like what we do, please hit the subscribe button. See you next time. Please take care of yourselves.